The sound is unmistakable, a crisp, authoritative baritone cutting through the roar of a sold-out arena. It's a voice that doesn't just describe the action, it gives it weight, meaning, and legitimacy. And here comes the champion, a man who carries the weight of this entire organization on his broad shoulders. Look at the crimson mask, the blood flowing freely, a testament to the sheer brutality of this contest. A suplex, or as we call it in the trade, a suplex, executed with textbook precision. For millions of people, for an entire generation, this wasn't just the voice of a wrestling show. It was the voice of wrestling itself. It was the voice of Gordon Solie. It was a voice that felt permanent, infallible, and eternal. A voice that seemed destined to be the soundtrack of professional wrestling forever. Then, one day, that voice began to fade, and soon, it was gone completely. This was the voice of wrestling, and this is the story of how it was silenced. In the chaotic world of professional wrestling, a realm built on spectacle and bravado, credibility is maybe the rarest commodity of all. For decades, one man was its main source. He wasn't a 7-foot giant or a charismatic champion. He was a man in a blazer, sitting at a desk, speaking into a microphone. His name was Gordon Solie, but to the world, he was simply the Dean. He was often called the Walter Cronkite of professional wrestling, and it was for a good reason. In an industry often dismissed as a carnival act, Solie treated it like a legitimate sport. He gave it gravitas. He gave it a sense of realism that drew fans in and made them believe. His voice was the steady anchor in a sea of mayhem, the trusted narrator guiding viewers through epic sagas of heroes and villains. He didn't just call matches, he wove tapestries of athletic struggle and human drama. His words could turn a simple body slam into a strategic maneuver, and a bloody brawl into a Shakespearean tragedy. But in a cruel twist of fate, the very instrument that made him a legend, his iconic voice, would become the focus of his greatest and most tragic battle. This is the story of how the industry's most revered voice rose to define an era, only to be cruelly extinguished by a devastating illness, leaving a silence that can still be felt today. To truly get what was lost, you have to understand what he built. Gordon Solie, born Francis Jonard Labiak, wasn't a product of the wrestling business. He was a product of broadcasting. With a background in radio and news, he stepped into the world of professional wrestling in the 1950s, not as a fan or a former athlete, but as a professional communicator. And that distinction would become his greatest asset. His journey began in the Sunshine State, with a promotion that would become synonymous with his voice, Championship Wrestling from Florida. It was there that legendary promoter Eddie Graham recognized the unique power of Solie's delivery. In an era where wrestling announcers were often just hype men, shouting to sell the spectacle, Solie did the opposite. He was calm, he was measured, he was analytical. He spoke to the audience as if they were intelligent observers of a real athletic contest. His style was a masterclass in authority. He used a vast, almost clinical vocabulary to describe the chaos on screen. A wrestler bleeding wasn't just busted open, he was wearing the crimson mask. A wild fight wasn't just a brawl, it was a Pier 6 brawl, a term that made you picture uncontrolled dockside violence. He'd call a vertical suplex with that unique academic-sounding pronunciation, suplex. These weren't just quirky catchphrases, they were building blocks of a specific reality. He explained the psychology of a hold, the strategy of a tag team, and the physical toll each move took. He called it right down the middle, giving credit to the hero and the villain alike. This journalistic approach made the whole thing feel more real. If a man as serious as Gordon Solie was taking it seriously, then the fans could too. From Florida, his voice soon became the soundtrack for wrestling across the entire southern United States. Through syndication and his work with Georgia Championship Wrestling, which aired nationally on superstation WTBS, Solie's influence exploded. He became one of the defining voices of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, during its most powerful era. When legends like Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, or Harley Race defended the 10 pounds of gold, It was Gordon Solie's narration that framed their battles as epic encounters. He was no longer just an announcer, he was an institution. He was the Dean, a title given to him out of universal respect from everyone in the business. The late 1980s brought a seismic shift in professional wrestling, and the ground was shaking under the world Gordon Solie had helped build. The territory system, that patchwork of regional promotions where Solie was king, was crumbling. The architect of this change was Vince McMahon, whose World Wrestling Federation was aggressively expanding into a global juggernaut. McMahon's vision of sports entertainment was a technicolor explosion of rock music and cartoonish characters, a world away from the gritty, sports-centric presentations Solie had perfected. As promotions were absorbed into what would become World Championship Wrestling, or WCW, Solie made the transition. He was a living link to the NWA's prestigious past, and his familiar voice was a comfort to longtime fans. He was still Gordon Solie, the voice of reason. But the world around him was changing fast. The focus was shifting from in-ring action to backstage skits and merchandise-driven characters. His time in WCW was a slow drift from the center of the universe to its edge. As the 1990s wore on, the clash between his old-school values and WCW's new direction became more obvious. The final break came in 1995. The reasons were complex, reflecting a man who felt more and more alienated from the business he loved. Many point to his principled objection to the WCW Hall of Fame induction of Angelo Poffo, which Solie felt was a political move by Poffo's son, Randy Savage. It wasn't just one incident, but likely the culmination of years of frustration with a business he no longer recognized. His final broadcasts for WCW that summer marked the quiet end of an era. There was no grand farewell tour, no emotional send-off. The greatest voice in the history of the business simply faded from the national airwaves. For the first time in decades, wrestling was without its dean. He had stepped away from a world that, in many ways, had already left him behind. But as he left the announce table, he was unknowingly stepping toward a far more terrifying battle. After leaving the national spotlight, Gordon Solie settled into a quieter life. He stayed connected to the business through newsletters and fan conventions, where he was treated with the reverence usually reserved for world champions. To his admirers, he was the same sharp, insightful Dean. But behind the scenes, a cruel enemy was gathering strength. In the late 1990s, unsettling reports began to circulate through the wrestling community. Gordon Solie, the man whose voice was his identity, was battling cancer. The irony was as brutal as any wrestling storyline. For a broadcaster, a cancer diagnosis is a terrifying ordeal. But when the disease and its treatments target the throat and vocal cords, it's a nightmare made real. It's a direct assault on one's livelihood and very essence. The contrast was heartbreaking. This was the man who sat stoically amidst the chaos of battle royals, whose calm demeanor never broke. His voice was a bastion of control. Now, he faced an opponent he couldn't analyze or call down the middle. It was an invisible, relentless force attacking him from within, aiming for the very source of his power. The struggle was no longer about selling a story to an audience. It was about the raw reality of human frailty. The golden voice of wrestling was fighting a battle not for a championship, but for his life. The fight against cancer is a war of attrition, taking a grueling toll on body and spirit. For Gordon Solie, this war was waged mostly in private, but the results would become a matter of public sadness for all who revered him. As the illness progressed, so did the aggressive treatments required to fight it. The battle against the cancer eventually required a devastating procedure on his throat that, while aimed at saving his life, would ultimately cost him his voice. The news sent a shockwave of grief through the wrestling world. It was a tragedy of almost mythological proportions. The orator, robbed of his tongue. The voice that painted vivid pictures of Ric Flair's strut and Dusty Rhodes' bionic elbow was now itself just a memory. The man who could make a simple headlock sound like a life-or-death struggle was now unable to whisper. Even without his voice, Solie's passion remained. In his final years, he communicated by writing, continuing to share his brilliant mind and encyclopedic memory with those who sought him out. Seeing the legendary announcer, the epitome of cool authority, in this diminished state was a poignant and difficult experience for friends and fans. He was still Gordon Solie, the mind was still there, but the magnificent instrument was gone. It was a constant, visible reminder of his silent struggle. His presence at wrestling reunions was a testament to his unbreakable spirit. His love for the industry never faded, even when his ability to participate in it was so cruelly taken away. He was a fighter to the end, but this was one opponent that even his famous resolve couldn't defeat. The voice of an era was fading into an echo, and the silence that followed was deafening. On July 27, 2000, the wrestling world received the news it had been dreading. Gordon Solie passed away at the age of 71 due to cancer. The final 3 count had fallen on the life of wrestling's greatest narrator. The Dean had called his final match. Immediately, an outpouring of grief and tributes came from every corner of the industry. Wrestlers who grew up listening to Solie call their heroes' matches mourned the man who gave their own careers legitimacy. Announcers who modeled their styles after his paid homage to their master. Legendary commentator Jim Ross has consistently credited Solie as a primary influence, acknowledging the towering figure whose professionalism paved the way for a more serious approach to commentary. The legacy of Gordon Solie is woven into the very fabric of how professional wrestling is presented. He was the pioneer who proved that an announcer could be more than a hype man. He could be a journalist, a historian, and a master storyteller. In 2008, WWE posthumously inducted Gordon Solie into its Hall of Fame, a formal acknowledgement of his monumental contributions to the industry. His voice is forever linked to the history of Florida wrestling, a hotbed he helped put on the map. Fans of that golden era can still hear his signature sign-off, a warm farewell that closed every broadcast. So long from the Sunshine State. It was more than a catchphrase. It was a weekly seal of authenticity from the most trusted man in the business. His work is preserved on thousands of hours of tape, a time capsule of an era when wrestling, through his voice, felt as real and as important as any sport on television. Gordon Solie's voice lives on in the memories of millions, and in the countless classic matches he called. He gave a voice to the voiceless, and a narrative to the chaos. Share your favorite memory of his commentary, a specific call, or a match that he made unforgettable for you in the comments below. Let's keep the legacy of the Dean alive. The story of Gordon Solie is a profound tragedy. It's the story of a master craftsman who reached the absolute peak of his profession, only to have the very tool of his trade turned against him by a merciless disease. His voice wasn't just his career, it was his identity. An instrument so powerful it could lend credibility to the incredible and humanity to the superhuman. He was the Walter Cronkite of a world of giants and kings, the steady hand that guided us through the fire. The cancer that took his life did more than just silence a man. It stole a piece of wrestling's soul. It took the voice that taught a generation how to watch wrestling, how to understand its nuances, and how to respect its athletes. It left a void that can never truly be filled. But a legacy like Gordon Solie's isn't so easily erased. A voice that powerful can't be completely silenced. It echoes through time. It lives on in the announcers who strive for his professionalism, and in the archival footage where he remains, forever, at the peak of his powers. The cancer may have taken his voice, but it could never take his words. And so, with the utmost respect for the man and his enduring impact, we end this story the only way that feels right. So long from the Sunshine State.